Russia, with its long and tumultuous history, has seen its share of revolts and uprisings. But the Decembrists' revolt in 1825 stands out as the first major organized attempt at revolution in the country. These revolutionaries, named after the month in which they revolted, were not the typical ragtag group of peasants or disenfranchised workers we might imagine. They were officers, noblemen, and intellectuals. The Decembrists' revolt marked a pivotal moment in Russian history, signaling the birth of a revolutionary tradition that would culminate, almost a century later, in the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. The seeds of revolution. To understand the Decembrists, we need to delve into the state of Russia in the early 19th century. Tsar Alexander I had come to power in 1801, succeeding his father, Paul the Poran, in a time of great political instability. Alexander's reign was initially filled with promises of liberal reforms. He had considered granting a constitution, abolishing serfdom, and establishing representative institutions. However, these reforms never fully materialized, as Alexander became more conservative over time, especially after the Napoleonic Wars. In these wars, Russian officers were exposed to European ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity, especially in France. They returned home filled with ideals about modern governance, representative institutions, and the rights of individuals. But in Russia, they were confronted with a rigid, autocratic regime that showed no signs of change. Serfdom, a system that bound peasants to the land and their landlords, was still a cornerstone of Russian society, with millions living in abject conditions. It was a system that, to the officers who had seen the potential for change abroad, seemed deeply unjust and outdated. The seeds of revolution were sown among the elite of Russian society, primarily young army officers, many of whom had participated in the wars against Napoleon. These men began to form secret societies, discussing ideas of constitutional monarchy, the abolition of serfdom, and for some, even republicanism. By 1816, the first secret society, the Union of Salvation, was established. These secret societies would eventually grow, leading to two main factions, the Northern Society and the Southern Society. The secret societies, Northern versus Southern, the Decembrists were not a monolithic group. They were divided by their visions for Russia's future and by geography. The Northern Society was based in St. Petersburg and was more moderate. Its members favored a constitutional monarchy, similar to that of the United Kingdom. They believed that Russia could evolve peacefully through reform and the establishment of a constitution that limited the powers of the Tsar. In contrast, the Southern Society, based in Ukraine, was far more radical. Its leader, Pavel Pestel, called for the complete overthrow of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic. Pestel's vision was revolutionary. He believed that serfdom should be abolished immediately, that land should be redistributed to peasants, and that the autocratic regime had to be overthrown through force. Though they differed in their visions, both societies were united by their desire for change. They shared a deep disdain for the existing system and a commitment to action. And that moment of action came in December of 1825, when an unexpected event provided the spark they had been waiting for. The confusing succession crisis. When Tsar Alexander I died suddenly in November 1825, it triggered a succession crisis. Alexander had no direct heirs, and his younger brother, Grand Duke Constantine, was initially expected to take the throne. However, Constantine had secretly renounced his claim to the throne, preferring to remain in Poland, where he governed. The throne was thus passed to Alexander's younger brother Nicholas. However, the public was unaware of this arrangement, and for several weeks, there was confusion over who the new Tsar would be. This confusion provided the Decembrists with a rare opportunity. Many of the army officers, particularly those in the Northern Society, refused to swear allegiance to Nicholas, seeing the moment as a chance to press for reforms. On December 14th, 1825, the Decembrists made their move. Around 3,000 soldiers and officers gathered in Senate Square in St. Petersburg, refusing to swear an oath of loyalty to Tsar Nicholas I. They called for a constitution, the end of autocratic rule, and in some cases, the abolition of serfdom. The revolt on Senate Square, The Decembrists were not a large force. About 3,000 soldiers, most of them from elite guard units, stood against the new Tsar's regime. But they were committed to their cause, believing that their actions could force Nicholas to concede to constitutional reforms. They demanded that the Senate refuse to accept Nicholas as Tsar, and instead declare a constitutional monarchy. However, the revolt was poorly organized. Communication between the northern and southern societies had been sporadic, and there was little coordination on the day of the uprising. Crucially, the southern society, led by the more radical Paved, had planned its own revolt, but was not yet ready to act. Tsar Nicholas, though initially caught off guard, responded swiftly. He ordered loyal troops to the square and gave the rebels a final opportunity to disperse. When they refused, he ordered his forces to open fire. The revolt was crushed within a matter of hours. Many of the Decembrists were killed and the rest were captured. The aftermath. In the immediate aftermath, the Tsar's government launched a brutal crackdown on the Decembrists. Many were arrested, including their leaders. The subsequent trials were conducted in secret, with Tsar Nicholas personally overseeing the interrogations and ensuring that the harshest possible punishments were meted out. 5 of the Decembrist leaders, including Pavel Pestel, were sentenced to death by hanging. Many others were sentenced to hard labor and exile in Siberia. This punishment, Siberian exile, was particularly brutal. It meant a lifetime of backbreaking labor in harsh conditions, far away from the comforts of the society they once knew. For many Russians, the Decembrists became symbols of sacrifice and martyrdom. Their failed revolt and the brutal repression that followed planted the seeds of further revolutionary movements in Russia. The legacy of the Decembrists. Though the Decembrists failed in their immediate goal of overthrowing the autocracy, their legacy endured. The Decembrist revolt was the first significant challenge to Tsarist autocracy, and it showed that change was possible, even in a regime as rigid and oppressive as Russia's. The Decembrists' actions, though short-lived, inspired future generations of revolutionaries. In the decades that followed, the Russian intelligentsia began to grow, with more people questioning the existing order. Radical ideas flourished, with movements such as the populists, and later, the Social Democrats, advocating for the overthrow of the Tsarist regime. Figures like Lenin would later look back on the Decembrists as precursors to their own revolutionary movements. The Decembrist wives also left their own mark on Russian history. Many of the wives of the exiled Decembrists chose to follow their husbands into Siberian exile, forsaking their comfortable lives in Russia to share the hardships of exile. Their sacrifice and loyalty became legendary in Russian culture, symbolizing the power of love and the strength of conviction. Over time, the Decembrists' legacy has evolved. While they are remembered as revolutionaries, their motivations were complex. Many were motivated by a sense of duty and honor, as well as a desire for political change. Some of them wanted to improve the conditions for Russia's serfs, while others sought to limit the Tsar's power and create a more just society. Their actions, though rooted in the elite class, set the stage for the more broad-based revolutionary movements that would follow. By challenging the absolute power of the Tsar, they opened the door for later movements that would eventually overthrow the entire system of autocratic rule in Russia. The Decembrists may not have succeeded in their revolt, but they were the first to openly challenge the autocratic Russian state in a meaningful way. They were the forerunners of a long line of revolutionaries who would follow, culminating in the seismic events of 1917. While their uprising was brief and their goals were never fully realized, the Decembrists left an indelible mark on Russian history, becoming symbols of courage, sacrifice, and the eternal struggle for justice and reform. Their story is a reminder that even in the most repressive of regimes, there are always those willing to fight for change, even at the cost of their lives. If you liked that video, so watch video number 5, you will also like this one.